A good marketer understands that the ROI, the profit, is often on the second purchase or the third gift. If you are a salesperson and you don't think about building that relationship, you're not going to make money and you're not going to succeed, just as the fundraiser is the same thing. And it's changing generationally. The older donors often would give because, well, frankly, they wanted social capital. It's, their peers give, so they give, they show up at the gala, they get to do business networking through you. Younger donors really do want to see more of a metric on ROI, on impact on their giving. The conversations that I've had with donors over my lifetime of doing this work have not changed. People are still looking for a way to find connection and community and to make a difference. I live in San Francisco. I walk or I drive down the street, I see somebody who's experiencing homelessness. That pains me. It pains the donor class that I work with as well. And they know that if they are walking down the street and they give that person maybe $20, it's probably not really going to change their lives. But when they work through me as a conduit and join with other people in an institution, they can see that kind of change and that kind of impact happen. If I was having a conversation with somebody, for example, around legacy giving, go into somebody's home and they might sit down with me, an individual or a couple, and the conversations will be very vulnerable. Talking about their kids, talking about their home, talking about what they want to do with their assets, and talking about what their legacy is, what the impact is. And all of those conversations were just like what I said to you. I want to make sure my family's okay, and I want to make sure that my community's okay. That's what we're all looking for, I think.
Hey there, a quick interruption to give you some context. You're watching Beyond the Peak Pod, a show for marketers, founders, and nonprofit leaders who want real strategies, not hyped trends, to stay focused and effective in a constantly changing landscape. We talk with experts about how they stay sharp, accountable, and grounded in what actually works. This show is produced by Peakbound Studio, a Bay Area video team trusted by nonprofits and growing businesses to tell real stories that help move people to action. Now, without further ado, I hope you enjoy this conversation. Why fundraising specifically? How did you get your start?
It's a way to really leverage your impact in the world. The more practical answer is I needed a job. I was in marketing communications, small business, and here in San Francisco when I moved here 30 years ago for a multi-million-dollar nonprofit. I lost my job. I was looking around trying to figure out what can I do? And a friend of mine invited me to a fundraising trade association meeting. I went there. I met my people. We shared kind of the same interests and ethics, and there were lots of free resources available. And over 6 months, I reinvented myself as a fundraiser and never looked back.
In your opinion, what is fundraising, essentially?
People from outside of this field look at it as raising money, sales. And it certainly is that to a point. But if you only think of it as sales, you think of it as a pressure on somebody, you're not going to be successful and you're not going to sustain yourself in either because that's a deadening kind of job to do. I think of fundraising more as an invitation, a way to create connections across lines of differences, class, economic, and just people. When I successfully ask somebody for a gift and they hand me that $10,000 or $100,000 check, they say thank you and they give me a hug. It's healing and transformative, not only for the people who are receiving the benefit of that gift, maybe young people experiencing homelessness or an arts organization trying to, save some sort of master, but it's also very healing and transformative for the person who gives. And this is how we, I think, in part, heal the divisions that we have in this society, helping bring people together across these lines. And so for me, fundraise is very transformative, kind of my tagline. And it's a way of bringing joy into the world. Who wouldn't want to do that, right?
There's a lot of communication right now about what is the ROI on marketing itself. Sometimes it's hard to measure. What would be that for your fundraising efforts? How do you communicate that to donors?
Let me answer your question in two parts. Marketing is fundraising, fundraising is marketing, right? I want to be clear about that. A good marketer understands that the ROI, the profit, is often on the second purchase or the third gift. And so if you are a salesperson and you don't think about building that relationship, you're not going to make money and you're not going to succeed, just as the fundraiser is the same thing. But people who come into fundraising just have such often a misunderstanding of sales that this is why I think that framing that I shared with you earlier is so important. And it's changing generationally. The older donors often would give because, frankly, they wanted social capital. It's, their peers give, so they give, they show up at the gala, they get to do business networking through you. Younger donors really do want to see more of a metric on ROI, on impact on their giving. And this is I'm not saying it's completely 100% different, but it is something that is changing. How many youth have you impacted? What kinds of measures of changes do you see in their life? What was the percentage of the money spent on operating overhead versus program delivery? These are all metrics of efficiency and effectiveness that particularly more younger donors are looking for. And they also are ones who are wanting to get more involved in doing in their time and volunteering as well.
You mentioned that younger donors are a lot more interested in what the results of their contributions will make. How do you explain those results to a prospective donor?
Yeah, and I would say these are broad generalities between generations, but there is a shift in younger donors. If I was working with a donor, whether it's an individual or say a foundational representative, there's a conversation that happens. There's a proposal that often gets submitted, whether it's a one-pager or 12 or whatever. And then once there's an agreement, there is a literal contract or a letter of agreement and those have specific deliverables. X number of people served, these kinds of services, these kinds of outcomes that you're trying to do. And so as the nonprofit or the individual, you're trying to make sure that that's something that you can measure and that you can actually achieve at. Ideally you underpromise and overperform, right? And so you're keeping up to date with that person or that institution throughout the year. Maybe they're just on the mailing list. If they're a larger donor, maybe there's a quarterly or biannually check-in or even a site visit. Mm-hmm. And so by the time that annual report is due, the funds have been expensed. Hopefully you've delivered on it. But if you haven't, you've already shared with folks in advance where the delta is going to be, what you're doing to address that, and already gotten their buy-in. Fundraising is a lot like dating. You are always trying to build a deeper relationship with somebody. And if you rush too fast, you might break that trust, or the gift might be small. But if you take the time to build the relation, build the trust, the depth of the relationship builds, the length of the relationship builds, and the money increases as well. It's conversational, it's reporting out on metrics, it's allowing people to see the tangible impact of the program.
Can you give me an example of what those tangible impacts would be, or like the metrics that you follow?
Yeah, so every organization is going to be different, obviously, but my most recent nonprofit, Larkin Street Youth Services, where I was for 5 years, is an amazing organization dedicated to ending youth homelessness here in the Bay Area. And they serve about 2,000 youth every year. And they had 6 people out of their staff of 250 who just ran the numbers. And there's lots of different numbers. So I could say 200 young people walk through the door every year, or I could say 500 young people access their education and employment programs. I could say 100 young people of that group receive financial or educational support to access secondary education, college, City College, San Francisco State. I could also have similar numbers about how many people accessed healthcare programs. So there's an on-site clinic there. Or how many people accessed housing, whether it's short-term housing like shelter, longer-term transitional housing, or all the variety of different kinds. They had about 12 different buildings across the Bay Area, including here in the East Bay, that they managed. So you just break those markers down and those measurables down. Some donors are interested in the big picture. Some donors might just be interested in, say, education. Often a donor has some relationship to the issue. Maybe it's a child who had some challenges in the educational programs, school systems themselves, or a brother or sister experiencing homelessness. There's usually some connection there. Youth homelessness is something that kind of hits at all of our hearts, but particularly with something like, say, a theater group, there's, usually like they really like that artistic expression. So you're finding that connection, you're reporting back on it, and you're speaking into the ear of the donor.
Have you ever worked with an organization that actually measured long-term impacts of their programming?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, once again, Larkin Street is an example. I think they're wrapping it up just about now. It was a 3-year research control trial. This is the most kind of academically intensive kinds of researches. You have a control group and then another group of young people. And what they're proving is that direct cash transfers, financial support helps stabilize young people's lives. Now, you and I both know that's true. We don't need to even do a 3-year study, right? If I gave you $1,500 a month, that would help you even as a working professional, let alone if you're a young person experiencing homelessness. Mm-hmm. But if you're trying to prove to the government or other funders that this is a demonstratable, impactable program, you need to do these kinds of trials. Mm-hmm. So they got $4 million, $2 million from Google, $2 million from the city of San Francisco to do this long-term longitudinal study. There's a university in Chicago that was running all the numbers for them. And I'm confident that, when that final report comes out, it will show a measurable difference. Now, is that enough to change public policy, particularly in this political situation that we're all living in this country right now? I don't know. But is it enough to change the minds of, say, Google to do some more investments in there, or some of their peers, or some of the tech firms that are benefiting from AI and other kinds of, explosive technologies that we're having? Maybe. So that's the kind of longer term impact that might be measured.
I feel like there's this trend or this belief that people hold that there's a pot of money and it's a limited amount. Do you think that's true? And yeah, how big do you think it is?
This is one of those things where both yes and, you can have multiple truths here. It is very true that federal funding, which is, let's just say, roughly a third of all revenue that goes into the nonprofits in this country, is being dramatically cut. Billions of dollars, right, have been cut from the budget that it just got passed. And there are ongoing efforts specifically targeting organizations that serve communities of color, immigrants, and other low-income folks, transgender folks, and other kind of disadvantaged communities in this country. We all know this. Now, that is real. That is true. And that's the scarcity that we live in right now. Also is true, last year over $550 billion was given to nonprofit and community-based causes throughout this country from a variety of organizations and individuals and institutions. That's a lot of money. How much do you or I or anybody need for the cause that they care about? Not 550 billion, maybe 100,000, maybe 1 million, maybe 100 million, but it's a fragment of the money that is flowing into this sector from philanthropy. And that 550 billion, that doesn't count the government funds, right? So there's also abundance out there. And if you are to survive in this work, you need to lean into that belief in abundance, the truth of the abundance. Money is shifting in how it's distributed in this country. It is becoming increasingly concentrated amongst a fewer number of high net individuals and families. But there is still great wealth, and there's still great opportunity to raise money.
Why nonprofits? Why have you decided to work in the nonprofit sector?
I think I have to blame my mom. My mom is my role model. She lives up in San Rafael. She followed me out here about 15 years ago from Minnesota, where I was born and raised. My mom worked her entire life as a probation officer for the city and county of Hennepin County in Minnesota. But she was also, I think more importantly for this story, a lifelong volunteer. Faith is important to her. She still volunteers at her church. For the last 10 years, you could have gone out once a week to the Golden Gate Visitor Center and saw my mom volunteering, welcoming guests from around the globe. She volunteers still at a local park. That sense of community involvement I got from my mother. And my father, God rest his soul, was an entrepreneur. And he had 50 patents. He was always looking for the next solution to some sort of problem. Now, he didn't have quite the social values that my mom does in a sense of community, but he was entrepreneurial. Fundraising brings those two parts of me together, and it's a way to express that. I didn't really understand that until after I was doing the work.
You have 35 years of experience in fundraising. Have you seen any kind of a shift? Obviously, like wealth, like you mentioned, is becoming more concentrated. Right. But has the intention for these individuals that have a lot of wealth changed at all that you've seen? Like, are people more philanthropic now than they used to be?
Let me answer that in two parts. So there's something called the social indicators of health, and that's kind of reference that first part of your topic. Mm-hmm. When we think about good health, it's not just the doctor's visit. There's housing stability. There's family relationships or community support. There's a variety of different things that create health. Mm-hmm. And, it would be wonderful if we had a society that focused on those things, made investments there, like early childhood education, right? And then we wouldn't have to worry as much about the impact, the homelessness, other kinds of things that happen, because we've worked at those early places where the investments make a bigger ROI on the back end. There was stats from Larkin Street that a firm had done, I think Bain & Capital, but if for every dollar invested in a similar organization like Larkin Street, it saves society $8. So that's, part of the conversation is helping people understand that. The conversations that I've had with donors over my lifetime of doing this work have not changed. People are still looking for a way to find connection and community and to make a difference. I often say that I live in San Francisco. I walk or I drive down the street, I see somebody who's experiencing homelessness. If that pains me. It pains the donor class that I work with as well. And they know that if they are walking down the street and they give that person maybe $20, it's probably not really going to change their lives. But when they work through me as a conduit and join with other people in an institution, they can see that kind of change and that kind of impact happen. That kind of desire has not changed at all. There are some donors that are looking for more of an ROI on their donations. I would say that if you look over those, say, from the 70s to now, there is definitely a much more a focus over the last 50 years on ROI. That's just a reflection of the kind of the capitalist society I think that we live in. So the addendum is there is trust-based philanthropy, which also is something I think we might have talked about, or I talked about with somebody else recently. And this is the opposite of that in many ways. It's, we trust you, we're going to make this investment, and you as the community-based organization are closer to the impact, the cause, and so you know better how to use the money. So we're not going to put these onerous kinds of requirements on you. That has also increased in the last, I would say, since the pandemic. I still think that's a small percentage, single digits maybe, of the donors that are out there. But it's an important conversation, particularly as we move into a very rapidly changing economic environment because of the shifting politics. The older style of or more mainstream style of investment, I don't think moves fast enough for the current economy. Do you or I know what the world's going to be like 12 months from now, let alone 3 years from now? No. So giving nonprofits more flexibility and more with those gifts and building that trust and making, basically doing more vetting up front and building that relationship is very powerful. Stupski Foundation locally in the region here is one that's leading on that. Typically, foundations have historically given out about 5% of their principal every year because they're trying to maintain their principal. I think Stupski goes out 15%, and they're working to spend down. There are other foundations and other donors, not a lot, but some leading ones that within the last few months have joined in increasing those payout rates because they know we're at an inflection point in this country, and that's to be celebrated.
What do the donors look like that you generally work with? Mm-hmm. Is it like individual small contributions, or does it lean more in these foundations like you?
Well, it varies by what your organizational size is, who what you do. Let's say you're running a nonprofit that's trying to solve some sort of esoteric disease that impacts a small number of people, but it's very devastating. That's going to be a very different donor-based profile than what I used to work for, the more broader community base. So that varies dramatically. We do look, though, let's say I'm trying to raise $1 every year. The majority of that dollar comes in from a small number of donors. Major donors is what we call them. Historically, it might have been something like 80% or 80 cents on that dollar came from 20% of the donors. These days, it's probably more like 10 to 90 or 5 to... It's a smaller percentage that gives the vast majority of the dollars. At Larkin Street, we had 3 individuals or families that gave at one time $3 million a year out of the $10 million that I was raising from private dollars. That's a lot from a small number of donors. And if one of them changes their giving pattern, it impacts us dramatically. There's a tension to be had there. So the wise fundraiser understands they need to put a significant amount of their time building that relationship with those high net worth individuals or institutions, but also building the pipeline, the mid-tier donors, and even the more grassroots donors. You have to automate, the grassroots stuff, email lists, moving into more AI kind of moderated kinds of things, maybe personal events for the mid-tier donors. So you have to have a strategy, a funnel, and you have to allocate your time appropriately.
There's this idea in marketing, or there's, I guess, a shift happening right now to have marketing be much more personalized than it used to be.
Yeah.
I imagine it would be true for fundraising as well if the majority of funds come from a small portion of your donor base.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about how fundraising is becoming more personalized?
Yeah. Just like in every other marketing field, we're moved from mass marketing to personalization. And that shift has... Maybe the nonprofit sector is a little behind the commercial sector, but it's certainly happening. When I was younger, we did mass marketing mailings. Remember mail? And it would be, the same letter to the 10,000 people. Mm-hmm. And then over time, you'd start to segment that list. And then each letter would be different because you'd customize it for that person, at least the salutation. Yeah. And then you might have, over a period of time, we start to customize the ask amount because I have more data in my database. These days, every single email can be personalized. I had a program at my last nonprofit called Gravity. It was for working with these major donors. It was not cheap, but every morning it would look into my donor database, actually while I slept, and then it would look into what we call wealth analytics of hundreds, if not thousands of financial data that it's possible to purchase and get information on people through their tax records or other kinds of public records. And in the morning, it would pre-write me 10 emails to send out to the top 10 donors. So that's the kind of customization that is possible. Now, that was 5 years ago, and that program cost 5 figures. Mm-hmm. Now you could probably get something much less expensive or even cobble together something yourself with, some scripts.
Yeah.
We are moving to a point where every interaction with every donor will be personalized. when I would go out and do an in-person call, I would have research that would be done previously. So I would know about you, who you give to, what you're interested in. Even when I came to meet with you today, I asked, I call her my girlfriend, ChatGPT, to do a profile on you, your interests, so that I could know how to present myself. These are the kinds of tools that should be ubiquitous if they're not already in marketing and particularly in nonprofits.
So my first impulse is like, oh, that's kind of a little scary.
Of course it is.
What is your perspective on that? Like, how do you?
Well, I've personally, I pay to get out of the data brokers. I mean, it is scary.
I do too. So
Yeah.
Did you find much on me? Because this will be the test of that.
Well, Peak is, you've got a website.
Oh,
You've
true.
got a marketing background.
Yeah.
And it's just a general thing.
Yeah.
I didn't do the wealth screening.
Okay. That's great.
But I just had a client that they wanted to find foundations, institutional funders. And there's a service that's about $250 that I can subscribe to. I did the preliminary research with my AI assistant. And then I went in and I checked and I qualified those leads that I got with, my subscription to AI in the more specialized wealth screening database. And most of them came back accurate. But then I was able to get more detailed information, create profiles for each one of these institutional donors, and create a complete engagement plan, leveraging AI and the data. So, those are the things that are possible.
Are there any interesting applications of AI that you recommend more nonprofits start to use into their process?
Well, my background, of course, is in fundraising and resource development, and AI is that's the best place to start. I have kind of a framework that I share with people. And the first thing is, make sure your data is secure. So work with your IT team, work with your consultant. You don't turn on the AI until, your file structure is good. But working, say, with a fundraising team and leveraging AI to streamline the production of marketing materials, whether it is social media content, whether it is a grant proposal or a report, can really streamline the process. As a consultant, I create custom GPTs. I spend like 4 or 5 hours when I get contracted. I pull everything down I can find on them. I get all their financials. I create a custom GPT, and then I've got a little brain that can help me do the work for them. And if I have to write a grant proposal, rather than spending 10 hours writing it manually, I can write it in an hour or two with my AI assistant because I've preloaded it with previous grant proposals, funding guidelines, and other kinds of things.
How do you see AI improving fundraising efforts? Like, what is the best case scenario that you see?
Well, the best case scenario is that it helps us do more with less, and that it helps streamline the back office so that we can spend more time in person with our donors. That's the best case.
Are there any other things that you say to your clients to keep fundraising simple for them?
First, I try to help them transform their relationship to money. And that's usually some visualization exercises or some role playing or things like that. And then it's simple planning, and it's breaking things down like a pie chart. Like how much money you have to raise. You've got these gift markets. Which is your major gift market? Spend the majority of your time there. Within that gift market, spend the majority of your time on your top prospects. A lot of fundraising, like a lot of life, this one I'm still learning, is learning to say no, to try not to do it all. Because if you try to do everything, host the gala, have the in-person visits, do the grant writing, all the things, unless you have a very large team, you will go crazy, you will burn out, and you won't hit your goals. You need to remain focused.
So in our pre-interview call, you said a question that I would really like to incorporate. What brings you joy?
My family brings me joy. And I'm queer and I'm openly transgender. And I've created this very intentional chosen family in my life. People I've mentored, people I've married, people who are part of my birth family. I mentioned my mother earlier. I was with my family last night and we went to some friend's house and we had a potluck. And there's nothing better, right, than spending time with the people that you love. And in a world that feels overwhelming at times, for me, going back to that home place, that root that I have in my life, my family, the people I care about, and the people I've brought into my family, brings me great joy.
I know we've kind of touched on this, but do you see any parallels to this like human connection that you're talking about to fundraising, why that's fulfilling for people?
Oh, yeah, of course. Um, I mean, I think I kind of mentioned we're all trying to make a difference in this world, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at the end of the day, when I'm, looking back on my life, I won't, like go, oh, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. I'll go, I wish I spent more time with my family. Or I wish I made more of an impact in the world. My legacy is not about dollars raised, it's about lives changed. That's how I measure my impact. I think that's how most people measure their impact at the end of the day. As a fundraiser, if I was having a conversation with somebody, for example, around legacy giving, this is a euphemism for, are we in your will? Are we in your estate plan? The conversations that I would go into somebody's home and they might sit down with me, an individual or a couple, and the conversations would be very vulnerable, talking about their kids, talking about their home, talking about what they want to do with their assets, and talking about what their legacy is, what the impact is. And all of those conversations were just like what I said to you. I want to make sure my family's okay, and I want to make sure that my community's okay. Now, that might be a faith-based community. It might be the Bay Area community, but we all have that, or that's what we're all looking for, I think.
The last question I have for you is, what is the hardest lesson you've learned in your career? And what advice would you give to a fellow marketer based on what you learned? The advice from the marketer before you was that it is important to get buy-in from all of the stakeholders involved in a project, because if you don't have that, you end up doing a lot of unnecessary work.
They're completely right. The farther up you go the food chain, the more important this is, because you have a variety of different stakeholders. Maybe the people you supervise, maybe the people who are your peers, maybe the people you report to. In a nonprofit, that could be your boss, but it could also be volunteers on the board. You could have community volunteers. And as a marketer, you also have kind of your community, your clients, the other kinds of stakeholders. Very few of us are in the place where we can make these kinds of decisions on our own without at least talking to some of them. And it's important to do that, not just because it's the right thing to do, to ask people their opinion, right? It's the ethical thing to do. But in the long term, even though it feels like it slows things down, it actually speeds things up, because then you don't have to come back and do it again, or you don't have to come back and apologize, or you don't have to, you actually basically are testing the idea out internally before you launch it publicly.
So then what was the hardest lesson that you had to learn through your career? And from that, what advice would you give a fellow marketer or fundraiser?
So I don't know if this is for everybody, but as I mentioned earlier, learning how to say no and setting boundaries. I had a job, and it was a while ago, where I invested so much of my emotional and physical energy in it, the hours, I got hospitalized. And that wasn't good for me, obviously.
Yeah.
But it also wasn't good for the people I worked with or I supervised or that I served. And those weeks or months leading up to that, I got myopic. I was thinking that kind of binary thinking. I wasn't able to be as generative in my ideation, and I don't think I was as inspiring. And after I took some time off, what I realized is, this kind of savior complex that I think I had, and maybe other people in nonprofits do, Maybe it's, my mother's, just the religious kind of background but it's not my job to save other people. But more importantly, there are other people who can do this work. Maybe there aren't a lot of people who had my skill set, but there are certainly people who do. There's somebody who's doing all of the jobs that I used to have, and they're all doing it great. Getting out of my own way of thinking I need to do it all, or I'm the only one who can do it, is so important. And I've tried in my life in many ways to always foster and mentor the next generation of fundraisers. We've talked a little bit about it in my service, and I think that is so important. And I think particularly as somebody gets closer to my age, it's important to understand when to step back and when to let the next generation to lead. And too long, I thought I was the only one who could do it. I had to save things. It's just wrong. It's just completely a wrong understanding of how things work. And I'm really glad I learned that. And I'm glad I have the opportunity to share that with you. We come up in the world, we do this work, we become fundraisers, we have the opportunity to make an impact in our world. And then the goal is to start to make sure you nurture the next generation and then help uplift them. I would never call it parenting, but there is a circle to life, and it happens in the workplace. And if you don't understand your place in that, it's a real shame. And other people can suffer because of it. So that's what I'll say.
So, Gayle, if people want to learn more about you, where should they go?
They can find me online on LinkedIn or at aximpact.com or at gayleroberts.com.
Thank you so much, Gayle, for being on the show.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
I
I enjoyed it.
appreciated your time.
Yeah. Welcome. I look forward to watching.